I could not be more excited to have April Dunford here. And April, I just want to start by thanking you for carving out the time for us.
It's good to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Before we get started, I just want to give you a chance to introduce yourself to everybody and then we can kick things off.
Sure. So my background is I spent 25 years of my career as a repeat vice president of marketing, mainly working at startups, but so in total, I think I had senior marketing and sales, occasionally operations and other jobs, but really I think of myself as a marketer. But I worked at 7 different startups. And the reason there's so many is because 6 of those got acquired. And then through acquisition, I ended up spending some time at some bigger companies as an executive there. And more recently, like in the last 4 or 5 years, I've transitioned to doing consulting. And I have a very particular focus on my consulting work. So I do positioning, and I work with B2B tech companies and mainly B2B tech startups.
Amazing. And that is actually what I'm so excited to talk about, because as I've read a lot of April's work and just gotten familiar with how she thinks about positioning, I've certainly convinced myself that about 95% of what applies to startups and even B2B companies around their positioning also applies to content creation and to being a writer. And obviously, April herself is an author, having published a book about about positioning. And so, April, I wanted to maybe start with what your definition of positioning is. And I'd also love to hear you talk about maybe what most people misunderstand about it or typically get wrong.
Yeah, this is, especially in the early days of being the positioning consultant, this was the worst part about my job was positioning is a really misunderstood concept. And even by experienced marketers, like if I were to take a dozen vice presidents of marketing and put them together in a room and say, define positioning, we're likely to get a dozen pretty different answers. I do a lot of speaking at conferences. And when I talk about positioning, I generally have to start by talking about what positioning is not, because everybody gets it confused. So people think it's the same thing as messaging, or they'll say it's the same thing as my tagline, or maybe they've read Simon Sinek or something and they're like, it's my why. Or my personal pet peeve is when people talk about brand positioning. That bugs me because as a marketer, there's branding and there's positioning, and those two things are actually really separate. So in my mind, all of those things, messaging, a tagline, your vision, your branding, your go-to-market strategy, all this stuff flows from positioning, but you kind of got to have your positioning nailed first. So my definition of positioning is positioning defines how your offering is the best in the world at delivering some value that a well-defined set of customers cares a lot about. Now that's a mouthful. And the reason it's a mouthful is because what positioning actually defines is 5 component pieces. So it defines exactly who do I compete with, or what do I compete with? It defines what you have that's different and better than that competition. It defines the value that you can deliver for your customers. Why do those features matter for customers? And then it defines exactly what customers are we talking about. So who exactly is this offering best suited for? And then lastly, it defines your market category, which you can think of as the market that you intend to win. So in technology, it would be like, am I email or am I chat? Because those things are 95% overlapping, but the 5% that's different make them really different. So those are the 5 pieces of positioning. So it's a little bit hard of a concept to get your mind around at the beginning, but it's, in my opinion, it's the starting point for everything we do in marketing and sales. I can't build campaigns to go after customers until I understand who the customers are and what the value proposition is I'm trying to express to customers. And I can't build a sales strategy if I don't know that stuff. I can't write copy if I don't know that stuff. I can't figure out my why if I don't know that stuff. So I have to start there.
I love that. And I think we were talking earlier about very often with being an online writer or being a blogger, you think you have a challenge with growth. Should I start tweeting more? Should I start doing this, the other thing to grow? when in reality, maybe it's something deeper and more aligned with what you were talking about, not being clear on some of these things.
Yeah, like we don't know how to grow until we know that stuff. Like it's,
Yes.
when it doesn't help, we're on the internet. So if I were to just read marketing stuff on the internet, 99% of marketing stuff is very focused on tactics. How do I run better Facebook ads, or how do I do better SEO or Google ads or something? Tactical stuff. Content marketing. How do I go do that? I need to be better at Twitter. How do I go do that? And so there's all this writing about that stuff. And what's frustrating about that as a head of marketing is if I just need to know how to do Google ads, I can find a guide that tells me how to do that. In fact, there's lots of guides out there. If I Google the ultimate guide to Google ads, I'll find like 100 of them, and there'll be giant books on it, and I can figure that out. What I can't do in a Google search is find out whether or not I should be doing Google ads in the first place. Should I pick that over SEO? Should I pick that over Facebook ads? Should I pick that over going on the speaking circuit? Should I write a book or not? No one can answer that question for you, because the answer to those questions are super specific to your business. I can't answer those questions until I understand, who am I competing with? How am I different? What's the value I'm delivering to customers? Which customers are we talking about? Once I understand that, then I can say, okay, where do those customers hang out? And then I can figure out, should I do SEO? Should I do Google ads or whatever? So we need this strategic underpinning before we start jumping to tactics.
I love that. And one thing you touched on earlier is just, you've really seen this play out with the number of startups where you've led marketing, where you've helped advise. And we will, again, spin this much more towards writing and content creation. But I'm definitely curious to maybe hear a story of how positioning has really transformed maybe what was a not so promising startup or idea into one of these kind of big successes that, you've seen positioning guide them to.
Yeah. So I'll give you the story that I tell the most often, and it's probably the best one, although it's an oldie. It's an oldie but a goodie. So I joined a startup fairly early in my career as the head of marketing, and that startup was in the enterprise CRM space, so customer relationship management software. This is the space that is utterly dominated by Salesforce right now. But this was 15 years ago or so. And that space at the time was super dominated by this great big company called Siebel. And they were amazing. Like, they were the fastest company to ever hit $1 billion revenue in the history of Silicon Valley. Amazing, publicly traded. They were fantastic. So they were the kings of enterprise CRM. And so we were this dinky little startup in Toronto. and I think I was employee like 22, and we were positioned as the same thing. We're also enterprise CRM, and we didn't think that was a problem. And so, not surprisingly, every time we got a meeting with a potential customer, we'd say, hello, we're here to sell you some enterprise CRM. And they'd say, that's great. How are you better than Siebel? It's an obvious question. And our answer to that was, we weren't. We just weren't better than them. They were like, in almost any way you would measure a startup, they were better than us. They had 400 customers. We had 4. They had 8,000 employees. I think I was 22. Like, they had like everything. And the product was really mature. They had way more features than we had, everything. But we had 2 things that were differentiating, really just one, but 2 if you count the second one. So the first thing we had was, we had a feature that they didn't have. And not only did they not have it, they couldn't copy it because it was like deep in the architecture of the product. And what it allowed us to model relationships in a different way than them. And not only that, it looked really good in the product. So whenever we had a demo, we would demo it because it looked really good. The only thing that we didn't know, though, is like, we really did not have a firm grasp on why a customer would care about this thing. Like, we knew it was unique, but we had a really hard time articulating the value of this feature. But we would go in and we'd say, hi, we're enterprise CRM. And they'd say, how are you different than Siebel? And we'd say, we got this thing. And then we would give the demo, and customers would be like, oh, that looks great. That looks great. What do you use that for? And then we would say, anything you want, which is a bad answer, right? I don't understand what I would use this for. And then they'd say, what else you got? And then we would, what the second thing we had was just price. right? The other guys were the leader in the market. We were desperate for business. We were hardly winning any business. And if you just wanted something cheap, we dropped the price really low. And we were inadvertently positioning ourselves as cheap, crappy SIBO. If you don't care about features and whatever, but you just want it cheap, you buy us. And that was a lousy positioning. Like, people don't buy enterprise CRM because it's cheap. It's a strategic piece of software. So things aren't going so good. And we were about $1.5 million revenue, like under 2 million revenue at the time. Siebel at the time is, I don't know, 2 billion or something. And we're like 2.5 million, 2 million. And how we got out of this in this particular case was luck more than good management. How it happened was we ended up hiring a sales rep. So we were always turning over sales reps because we weren't selling anything. So we hired a sales rep, and that sales rep got us a meeting with the head of investment banking at Goldman Sachs. This is a big deal meeting because the guy's his buddy. So we go into this meeting, and I tag along with the sales rep because I want to see how this meeting goes. And we do the demo, and we get to this part with the special feature, and we show the feature just like we always do. And the head of investment banking at Goldman Sachs gets super excited. He's, oh my God, back up. Are you saying that if this person used to be on a board with this person, you could model that? And we're like, yeah. And he's saying, so if these people work at different companies, but they belong to the same country club, you could model that. And we're like, yeah, we can. And he says, whoa, wait, runs down the hall, comes back with a bunch of vice presidents that work for him. And he's, show them the thing. So we show the demo of this feature, and same thing, they get super excited about it. Everybody gets really excited. And basically we end the meeting with, we need this, we need it now, get it right away, and close the deal essentially in the meeting. So we're all excited. This has never happened to us before, where a customer got so excited. And so me and the rep are like, maybe investment bankers really like our stuff. We should try this on another investment bank. So we go get a meeting with Merrill Lynch, and we go in, same thing happens. We go in, we show the feature, everybody gets really excited, jumps up and down, and then we close the deal. It turns out that the value of this feature for an investment banker, this ability to model relationships that have nothing to do with people working at the same company, is super valuable to the way that they sell. So once we understood that, we were like, okay, now we know where to go fish. So before, we were just trying to close anybody who was enterprise. Now all of a sudden we know I got a secret feature, and that feature is really exciting to investment bankers. So we're like, forget selling anywhere else. We're just going to go sell to investment banks. So we focus all our efforts on that. And all of a sudden, like, revenue is going up like this, because every time we show it to a banker, freaks out, loves it, wants to buy it. Now, here's where the positioning bit gets in. So this triggers a conversation inside the company. Maybe we're not enterprise CRM. Maybe we're CRM for investment banks. Why wouldn't we be? We're only selling to investment banks. Now, when we first had that discussion, people internally were angsty about this. They're like, that doesn't sound like a very big market. How many investment banks are there? And oh boy, like, how are we going to make any money if we just sell to investment banks? And the way we finally reasoned it out to ourselves is like two things. One was like, it's not like we're selling any deals anywhere else. So what are we giving up by saying we're just investment banks? And then the other thing was, our longer term plan was, look, we'll go sell to investment banks. And when we're doing a really good job of selling there, then we're going to start selling to retail banks, because the retail banks, we can go to the retail banks and say, look, we're really big in investment banking. You should use the stuff that they use. And so we thought that could get us into retail banks. And then once we were selling into retail banks, that's not that different from insurance. And then we could be CRM for financial services. And we'll just adjust the positioning as we go along. And then once we got banking and insurance, now we're a great big company. We can go attack Siebel, because now we're big and not these little guys. And so that was the plan. And in my thinking as the head of marketing, I was like, what would be great about this positioning is the bankers could find us instead of me having to fight my way into the banks every single time trying to get a meeting. And so we did this repositioning, and now we're like, okay, we're not general purpose enterprise CRM anymore. We're CRM for investment bankers. And this was super transformational to the business. The biggest transformation was that before that, we always got in a head-to-head battle against Siebel, and we never won if we were in a head-to-head battle, because they're better than us and bigger than us and have more money than us and more sales reps, and just everything is better over there. But once we did this repositioning to CRM for investment banks, we'd walk in and we'd say, hey, investment banker, we got this thing, CRM for investment banks. And the bankers would say, CRM, wait, do you guys compete with Siebel? And we'd say, oh, Siebel. We love those guys. They're amazing. They're absolutely fit. What a company. So big, so much money, so many customers. They're amazing. They're like the world's most amazing general purpose CRM for, I don't know, call centers in India, manufacturing plants, retailers. Not you, Wolf of Wall Street. You need something special. Let me show you the thing. And we show the thing, they get all excited. And they wouldn't even talk to Siebel, because we do this job of positioning them as perfect for everybody else. But you need something special, and we're the only people that have that special thing. You're going to get it from us. So we went from a little under 2 million revenue to a little under 80 million revenue in 18 months. And then the end of that story is Siebel got so pissed off because we were beating them all over Wall Street and all these great big deals. And then we went to London and sold all the banks there. And then we were selling the banks in Switzerland. And then they came and acquired us for $1.3 billion. That's the end of that story, the end. And yeah, so it's counterintuitive, right? This idea that narrowing down would actually get us to growth faster than going after more people. But in my experience, that is exactly the way you do it, because you aren't Siebel, you aren't Salesforce. Like you have to start and build a beachhead somewhere, and figuring out where that targeted little spot is the key to growth, in my experience.
God, that is just a hell of a story. And it's funny. I'm thinking of this angle. It's if you're launching a podcast, and don't compete against Tim Ferriss, because he can land some huge celebrity.
You aren't Tim Ferriss. You're like maybe you're going to be Tim Ferriss someday, but you're not Tim Ferriss now. And neither was Tim Ferriss when he started, right?
That's exactly right. And that's actually, and the chat is already blowing up of epic story, which yeah, needless to say, I agree. This is a brilliant transition into your own kind of years-long journey, building out. You obviously wrote this book. You've built out really a public presence as an expert in positioning. But part of me, I assume it didn't quite start that crisp and clear. And I assume you've done quite a lot of work to really do this for yourself, not only these companies you've helped.
We're joking about this before we started, that I was saying, I think I've done a good job positioning myself. And then the side comment to that was, I sure as heck hope so, because if I'm a positioning expert and I can't position myself, then why would anybody buy anything from me? But yeah, so I see this a lot in people that are starting consulting businesses in particular. I had been this repeat vice president of marketing for years and years. And then I thought, I'm sick of being a full-time employee. I want to go out and do my own thing. And I did what everybody does when they come out of that. They're like, I'll just be a fractional CMO. Like fractional VP marketing. So instead of working for one company, I'll do the same job, only I'll do it for 3 companies. And this is terrible positioning. It's terrible positioning, because what I'm doing is positioning myself versus a full-time VP marketing. So the way my customers perceive that is, oh, I'm getting a full-time VP marketing, I only have to pay them 1/3 of the price. That's fantastic. She's going to give me everything the full-time person does, but I don't pay as much. Terrible. Can I deliver everything the VP marketing does when I'm only there 1/3 of the time? No, I can't. So the expectations are terrible. And it had all the problems that you have with it. That's not a consulting engagement. There isn't a product. There isn't a beginning of the project and an end of the project. And so I quickly determined that was a bad way to sell services. And what I got thinking about is a few things. Like, one is, what am I good at? And good at in a way that people need, but also good at in a way that they can't get anywhere else. What have I got that's different and better? Like, the world is full of marketing consultants and they do all kinds of stuff. And when I had to look back at my career and say, what have I done that's hard, that I know how to do, that few people do? And so one of the things that, was clear to me early was this positioning thing. It took me a really long time to figure out how to do that. There is no accepted methodology out there to do positioning. Like I had to learn it on my own and it drove me nuts. Like the first 5 years of my career, I was like, why haven't we solved this? There should be a book. I should be able to buy a book and it tells me how to do positioning. And instead there's a book that everybody reads, and everybody, when you go to marketing school, they show you this book. It's called Positioning: The Battle for Your Mind by these guys, Rees and Trout. And it's content marketing, right? What it does is it tells you what positioning is, gets you all excited about positioning. But if you want to actually do it, they run an agency and you're supposed to call them. So they're not giving away any of this secret stuff about how to get it done. So I was like, so I had a way that I was doing it when I was a VP marketing. So I got this idea, can I turn that into an offering and essentially teach customers or teach companies how to do that? And it was maybe a 2-year process for me to figure out how to really turn that into an engagement. Should I do the positioning for you, or should I coach you through doing your own positioning? And does this methodology work for everybody or only certain kinds of companies? And so it took me a long time to get really specific on it. But now the thing is crazy. Like now it's crazy. So my own positioning now is I only do positioning work. I only work with tech companies. I don't do B2C. I don't do consumer. I only do B2B because I'm good at B2B and I like B2B. So I just do that. I qualify really hard. Like when people call me, I have a set of criteria. And if you don't meet that, I just say I can't help you. And because of that, people that do meet my qualifications are willing to pay me a lot of money to come in and fix this thing because it's so specific. Who else are you going to call? I'm literally the only person on the planet that does this one little niche thing. So if you've got that problem, you don't have a problem writing me a big check to go help you solve it.
And this was that's a perfect segue into something where I was curious to ask you about. Very often, if you do start to maybe land on that thing that makes you distinct, this is maybe I'm the only person in the world who can do this very specific thing. Maybe sometimes it's not obvious that's an important thing or that people need the help. So I'm curious if that's at all been a struggle for you, having to almost explain the importance of positioning, or if the demand was there and you just had to tap into it.
Yeah. So nobody knows what positioning is. If you're CEO of a startup, you don't wake up in the morning and go, God, my positioning sucks. I need to solve that. Where's I Google positioning expert and find me, right? That never happens. So part of my sales process, and again, it took me a while to figure this out, is I need to have a way to get in front of these CEOs to say, you ever have that thing where you're doing a sales pitch and you get to the end of the sales pitch and you think you've done this genius job and the customer goes, pitch it to me again? Or you get to the end of the sales pitch and the customer says, so you're just like Salesforce and you're actually nothing like Salesforce. You ever get that? That's what we're fixing here. So first of all, I had to do a good job of really articulating what are the symptoms of bad positioning? Like, how do you know you got this sickness? Like I need to, so that, and then I needed a way to be able to communicate that out. I had to go to where those CEOs were and intersect them where they hang out. And so for me, my main sources of leads come from a handful of different places. So one is I do a lot of public speaking. I'm an okay public speaker. I've been in marketing. I'm all media trained. I've been in marketing for my whole career. So that's a thing that I can do and I'm okay at it. So I speak at a lot of conferences, but I'm not going to speak at any conference. I'm going to speak at conferences where there's a room full of CEOs of tech companies. And when I get that speaking gig, I'm in there talking about how to unlock your growth in your startup, how to make sure that your startup's product is intuitively awesome, that kind of stuff. And I'm standing up there and I start with this idea. Have you ever had this problem? Did this ever let me give you a scenario. We walk in, we pitch the thing and everybody go, pitch to me again. And there's a certain number of CEOs in the audience that I can see them. They've got this look on their face. Oh shit, we've got that. Yeah, that thing, we've got that. And so I go up and I do this thing. And so I've educated the audience on, if you feel this pain, it's likely your problem could be this positioning thing. And if you think this is your problem, here's how you might go about determining whether or not your positioning is good. So I'll do these talks, and that does that job. I do the same thing with podcasts, right? This is CEOs. Like once I know I'm selling to B2B tech CEOs of a certain size, I can figure out where they hang out. They go to conferences, they listen to a lot of podcasts. And again, not any podcast, particular podcasts they listen to. And so I'm trying to get myself there. And then the other thing is like they read books, they're book people. And should I rate a book? Yes, I should. But a particular kind of a book, right? Not any kind of a book. Like I did this thing like before I wrote my book. So I stewed on the idea of writing a book for a long time. And then I decided maybe I'm going to write a book. And I don't know anything about book writing because I've never written a book before. So I treated it like a product. And I went and I interviewed 50 CEOs of tech companies about books. So I know a lot of CEOs. So I call them up and I'm like, hey, I want to talk to you about books. Do you buy books? Do you read books? Tell me about your favorite book. What kind of books do you buy? And the answers I got were fascinating. It was like, they love books. They hear about books from their friends. They buy the book. They put it on their Kindle. They get on the airplane. This is pre-COVID. They get on the airplane to fly somewhere. And part of that flight is dedicated to reading this book. So they'll sit down and they'll read the book for however long the flight is, 3 hours, right? 3 hours, I read the book. I walk off the plane, I never come back to that book again. That's it. That's as far as I'm getting in that book. I got the gist of it, but I got that far. So when I wrote the book, I was very specific about it. I'm going to write a book that looks like a normal length book, but you can actually finish it in 3 hours. But anyway, so the book's been really good for me for lead gen. And then the other thing I have is word of mouth. CEOs hang out with CEOs. They're mastermind groups together. They're in communities like this. And so I do a lot of speaking in communities like this, or I'll go in and speak in these mastermind groups, or clients of mine will go and talk to the other CEOs, and that's how I get stuff.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I just want to download your marketing mind and approach my own content creation with such a strategic lens.
Yeah, but like I'll tell you, one thing I stopped doing was writing blog posts because CEOs don't read blog posts. And so people come to me and they'll be like, you used to blog all the time, April. And I'm like, yeah, it was a waste of time. Nobody read it. It was good for my ego. I'd see it getting spread around on Twitter and stuff, but like my target market didn't give a crap about blog posts. They don't have time for blog posts. They don't do it. Podcasts, they're listening to podcasts, but they're not reading blog posts. So I stopped doing blog posts. Like I have a reasonably big following on Twitter, not huge, but my Twitter people are very engaged. And I'll do a tweet stream will get picked up by a tech CEO. Like they're on Twitter a bit and they'll read a string of tweets, but they won't click on my blog post and read my blog post. They don't have time. They don't got time for that. Video. God. I should probably be doing like short form video, but I haven't quite got there yet.
I know, right? I'll be ready when the TikTok page launches and we can do 60-second lessons.
Yeah, I don't think my people are on TikTok either, but some of them.
I love the diligence you put into thinking about the book. And I actually am just a little bit curious to hear more behind the process of writing a book, because certainly you're extremely busy. I love that you figured out the medium that really works for your audience. But I'm curious to go maybe a little bit deeper into how you actually executed and went through on that product, because it seems like a big undertaking.
The first thing I had was, I knew I was going to write a book on positioning, obviously, because that's my jam. But the idea, I wrestled for a little bit at the beginning about, so what's the book about? And like I said, there's already this book that everybody's read called Positioning the Battle for Your Mind. It's really old, but it does a great job of defining, here's what positioning is, here's why you should care. But what it doesn't do is tell you how to do it. And so I wrestled with, should I just write the methodology, like the methodology I'm using with my clients right now? Should I actually just write that down in a book? And what's the pros and cons of that? And I decided that would be the best book. One, it's the book that everybody wants, right? Like they don't want me to redefine positioning and talk about why it's important and stop there. Like we already got a great book that does that. So what am I adding to the conversation here? Nothing. What I got that no one else has is the methodology. Now, you might get worried that you're like, okay, if I write the methodology down, then can't the companies just go and do it for themselves? And the answer is, yeah, they can. And in fact, my biggest competition, if you want to put it that way right now, is my own stuff. But it's great. So I go into these meetings and I'm like, look, like if you don't want to spend the money to have me help, you can buy my book and do it yourself. And here's what you get if you do it just with the book. And now here's what you're going to get if you do it with me. And if you do it with me, we're going to do it faster because you got me as a facilitator and I know what I'm doing. And I've done 150 of these workshops and we're going to get it done in a week. If you do it yourself, it'll probably take you a couple months, 3 months. Now, if you don't have much budget, maybe you don't care, in which case you should do that. You just use the book and do that. The other thing is you're going to get me as a facilitator. If you don't have me as a facilitator, then someone on your team has to facilitate. And that's usually the head of marketing or the head of sales, which means they can't really participate as the head of marketing or the head of sales, which is problematic. The other thing is like, and CEOs come to me all the time and they'll say, look, April, I know what I want the positioning to be, but my team is not in agreement. And I need somebody to help get us into agreement. And I don't want it to sound like I'm telling my team what to do. I want us to have a bit of a debate about it. And I want everybody to get into agreement and alignment together. And so that's why they hire me. It's not actually like the process facilitates that, but the value I'm adding is speed of getting it done, focus of we're all going to block off our calendar for a week and get it done, which you'll do when you pay the outside person to help you. And then the last thing is just for me as an expert facilitator that knows where all the rat holes are on this thing and can keep the process moving along. And the CEO doesn't have to do it, or the head of marketing doesn't have to do it. So that's really my value. If you don't care about any of that stuff, then you should pay $7 for the book and just do that rather than pay $30,000 to have me come and have you do it in a workshop.
God, it's brilliant. I love it's like you win on both fronts, which I think is brilliant. And
so for me, I hesitated at the beginning. I was like, I don't know if I should write this down and whatever, but then I did. And that was the smartest thing. So anyways, like coming back to your thing. So once I made that decision, like it's going to be the methodology, then it was the actual writing the manuscript of the book wasn't that hard because it's a bit like documenting the process that I've already got. There's a bit of preamble at the beginning. I got a level set you on what positioning's about and whatever. And then I have to document the process. The hardest part of writing the manuscript was getting it short enough that I thought someone would actually read it. And so I just kept taking things out and condensing it and rewriting to get it more succinct. And so that took me a long time. And then there's the whole book process, because I don't know anything about books. And all the advice I got was bad at the beginning because the book business has changed a lot in the last 5-10 years. So I talked to people that had published a book like 5 years ago, and they're like, you got to get an agent. You got to go to a book publisher. You're going to you got to negotiate a deal. It's going to take a year after that, all this stuff. And so I went down that path of traditional publishing and wasted a lot of time there. And where I ended up was for the kind of book that I was writing and what I wanted to do with the book, I got to the publishers and I was like, the publishers were literally quizzing me, like, how are you going to market this book? And how are you going to sell books? And how many books do you expect to sell? And what's your marketing plan look like? And how big's your email list? And how many followers do you have on Twitter? They're asking me all this stuff. And I'm like, and so I'm answering them. And then I'm like, so what do you do? What do you guys do? And the answer was, we produce the book, like we're going to give you an editor and get you nice cover art and do the internal layout and all that stuff. And we're going to get you listed with all the bookstores. And that's it. And I was like, I can pay someone to do that. And for the privilege of that, they take 70% of the money that your book makes. But I could pay someone up front to do that. And then the other thing they do is they get control over everything. You don't like the cover art they pick? Too bad. It's their book. You sold it to them, right? They'll change the title. You don't like the title? Oh, too bad. It's their title now. It's their book. They bought it. And so I didn't like that either. So in the end, I decided to self-publish and I hired a company to help me do it. So I hired a company that did the cover art, did the internal design. 2 editors worked on the book with me. They project managed the thing. They got me listed in all the bookstores and all the rest of it and formatted the ebook and all that bull crap that I don't know how to do. And I just paid them up front for that. And now I keep all the royalties. And then all the marketing was me, but I'm the marketer. I know how to do that. And so that's how I ended up doing it.
That's brilliant. I know you have such an advantage today being a marketer and being someone with an audience you have the leverage in that relationship.
And yeah, I didn't have a lot of an audience, to tell you the truth. Like, my audience is a lot bigger now, but I did have a couple of things. One was I had always done a little bit of public speaking. Like, in a typical year, I would do 4 or 5 speaking engagements. Like, I'd speak at 4 or 5 conferences. And so I decided with this book, I was going to lean into that. And so I basically put the word out. I was like, you want me to speak at your conference? I'm going to come speak at your conference. I don't care how big, how small, how anything, for the year while I'm launching this book, as long as you pay to get me there. Like, you don't have to pay a speaker fee. You just have to pay travel and hotel. If you pay to get me there, I'll come and speak. And so I did 60, I think in the end, I did 61 speaking engagements in a year, which, let me tell you, is way too many. Yeah.
Oh, that's incredible. That must be a
And then my audience was a lot bigger after that.
Yeah, I know. It adds up, just compounds after you 60 times doing anything. It'll start to hit.
Well, I want to leave everywhere, like big cities, little towns, all over the world, everywhere.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, all expenses paid at least.
Yeah, but you know, exhausting.
Oh, totally.
And not always staying in nice places either. Like, they're
right.
putting me in cheap, shitty hotel rooms. Like, they're not exactly putting me up at the Ritz on things. They're like,
yeah, free continental breakfast, but that's about it.
Oh, yeah. And half the time you weren't even getting that. It's like, oh, we have food at the conference, and you go and it's some hard old bagel. Like,
right, chewy bar and totally
watery coffee.
I know. Even that, we're now short on time, but like even the early tactical blocking and tackling you have to do to build an audience would be a ton of fun to talk about. But I do want to leave maybe like 15 minutes at the end here for Q&A. April, I'm going to ask kind of my final question here, which is that take as much time because it's a big question. But if you were just getting started as someone who maybe is doing the, fractional CMO thing, not feeling terribly differentiated, how would you encourage folks to really start to, speed up the process of finding their unique positioning?
Like, I do think that there are lots of really narrow problems to solve. And even if you're not an expert today in solving that narrow problem, you could be quite quickly if you really went down the rat hole of saying, I'm going to be the world's greatest expert on this little thing. And I've seen a lot of, again, most of the consultants I know that are really making good money and doing great work with clients, they've picked off one very small thing and said, I'm just going to do this, but I'm going to be so amazing at that. If you need this, I'm your jam. So I had a really good friend of mine in marketing. There used to be these guys that did product management training. And every year they produced this graphic, and it was all the things that a head of product management should do. And it has something like 28 boxes on it. And this friend of mine, he had always been a repeat vice president of product management. And so he decided he was going to go build a consulting company. And so he said, I'm going to go consulting. And I'm just going to pick one of these boxes, and I'm going to be the guy for that. And so he looked at the thing and said, which of these boxes do you hate to do that you would gladly pay somebody outside of the company to do? And he picked the box that said win-loss analysis. And it's true, like, we don't do win-loss analysis. We suck at doing it. We don't want to do it. It's time consuming. I would love to just hire some guy and do win-loss analysis. So he became that, and he grew it into this great big business. He had, and he shut it down, but at the end, he had 20 employees. He's got his own office. Like, he's just totally crushing it, doing just this one little thing. And so the people I know that are really crushing this stuff, and again, was he the king of win-loss analysis at the beginning of that? He'd done a bunch of it, like any vice president of product, but I wouldn't say he was the king of it at the beginning. But after he did 7 or 8 projects, he was like the absolute king of win-loss analysis. And then he became known as that. And so anytime win-loss analysis came up as a topic of conversation anywhere, like, people would say, I know a guy that does that. And we'd always be talking about the same guy. We'd be like, is it Alan? Yeah, Alan. Yeah, no, of course, because he's the guy that does that. And so there's this great power in being able to draw this box and say, I'm just that. And then it doesn't take that long to get known for that if it's necessary and narrow.
Yeah, what a brilliant story. I want to leave. We're right on time here for the last kind of 15 minutes or so for Q&A. So I want to welcome anybody on the call. You can just unmute. We've got a manageable number, so you can unmute and kick us off if you have any follow-up questions for April. I've got some that were submitted, but anyone's welcome to take the floor.
I know we're a small group.
I know. We'll see. Let's see. Cool. One question we had beforehand is, I'm actually going to pull up the list here. So yeah, this is like a little specific and related to what we were just talking about. But one of the questions that we had submitted beforehand was, if you are, in this case, maybe, a writer, in your case, you're in the marketing sphere, but say you're writing about, say, productivity, and basically some space where you feel like, almost similar to positioning, there's kind of a fuzzy definition of what the space actually means. Kind of what are maybe some of the questions that you coach people through in figuring out how to get more specific with the value they're offering? And I know who asked this, so I can elaborate a bit more, but
yeah, do, because I'm not sure I get it.
Yeah. So I think in the context of specific niches within like the writing community, so I'm writing about productivity, for example. I think productivity can be productivity tooling. It can be productivity habits. It can be, and there can be similar folks who are curious about that stuff. But I guess I'm curious, like, what questions you'd encourage people to ask themselves to get way more specific with kind of what their thing is.
So for that example, I don't know exactly, but I know for me, I was trying to get narrow on positioning in a way that was going to make me money as a consultant. Like, my end game was consulting, right? And so I wasn't just trying to, it would be different if I'm writing a paid newsletter, and how I want to make money is subscriptions. So if what I want to do is make money on subscriptions, then I'd be optimizing for, what does somebody want to read about every week? So what's a topic with enough depth and breadth that I can come at it a million different ways, and there's enough content and meat there that I want to open it up every week and read it, and I'd pay money for that. And so I would be thinking about that. How do I deliver that value week after week? As opposed to, if I'm writing with the idea that I'm optimizing for consulting, it's different writing. Like, I'm doing a lot of talking about, how do you know you got the problem? Here's different ways that problem can manifest itself. What I'm trying to do is, if a potential client lands on my writing, I'm trying to trigger that thought of, oh shit, maybe I have that problem. I should call that woman. That's what I'm trying to trigger. Like, I don't actually want you or care if you sign up for my anything. What I want is when you're sitting on that sales call and the customer says, pitch it to me again, I want you to go, oh, that gal, she talked about that. We got that thing. Who's that gal? I got to call that gal. That's what I want. I'm looking for that. And so I want you to see that and go, oh, my positioning sucks. I need that positioning consultant lady. And then they find me, and then they come and get me. That's what I want. So it'd be different depending on what my end game is. And again, if I wanted to write a book, and my goal was to sell a lot of copies of a book and not worry about selling consulting on the back of it, then I would have written a really different book. I wouldn't have put the methodology in there, because who cares about the method? I would have written something that's a lot more, I would have written a book that anyone could buy to position anything, anytime. And it would have been about, my examples would have been about how to position yourself, or how to position your pets, and I'd be giving you positioning examples about everything. But that's not my game here. I'm not trying to sell books. I'm trying to sell consulting. So all my examples are examples that look exactly like the kind of clients I want, because I want people that are like my clients to read this book and go, this sounds just like me. I should call this lady. Again, that's what I'm trying to get to. Everything I'm doing is, I want at the right moment for you to go, yeah, I need her. So I'm going to call her. So that's what I'm trying to get. So your end game on this thing, I think, is pretty important. And then you got to work through, what's the right product that gets you to that?
100%. God, I love that. It's like, start with the end in mind, if you will.
Yeah.
Another question that was maybe somewhat related, but it's more of maybe the inner game here, which is how would you encourage people to identify those things that they're uniquely suited to do? Are there questions they can ask themselves? Are there
Yeah.
exercises they can do?
Yeah, I don't know. And I don't know if I'm a good person to ask advice about this either, because I don't know. I don't know if I'm very good at that. Because if you look at me, it's weird, right? Like I have a degree in systems design engineering. And like I went to tech school and I ended up doing marketing. So what do I know about life paths? But I will say that when I started consulting, I had a very clear set of kind of high level things I was going for. And I wanted to do like good work that I really love. And so anytime I got in a project where I was doing something and I was like, you know what? I hate this shit. Then I just never do that again. Like sometimes people would say, can you, like after the positioning, can you write all the messaging for me? And I'm like, I can. I don't know why you'd want to pay me to do that, but okay. And sometimes you'd say yes, just because somebody asks you to do it and they're willing to pay you a lot of money to do it. But then you get in and you're like, I hate it. No, like there are 1,000 people out there that can write this stuff better than me. This isn't my best work. I want you to hire me just for the thing that I'm really good at. So I had this idea that I was going to do good work and with good people and get paid fairly for that. That was always my 3 pillars. And so the good work, I made a list of things that I like and things that I don't, right? Like I don't like managing people. I've managed people for 25 years and I'm tired of it. And so I like just being me. So I need it to be a consulting thing that I can do without having to hire a great big team. Like I have some people that help me. It's basically me. And then the second bit was good people. Like in startups, you get a lot of really strong personalities. And I had worked for a lot of super strong personality CEOs. And one thing you learn in startups is I also am a strong personality. And you got to get with the strong personalities where you're jiving as opposed to the ones where you hate each other. And so I filter for that really hard in the qualification calls I do, like good work, good people. So I'm trying to do this thing where I actually want to spend 3 days with you. I don't know. And if the answer is no, I just say no. So it's good work, good people. And then the last one is get paid fairly for that. One of the things in startups is employees in general get the shaft in startups. Like they don't get paid very well. They get stock options. They're often useless, like completely valueless. You get monkeyed out of your stock options even when you have an exit. And so I had this idea that, you know what, the reason you do startups is because the work is amazing, right? It's fun, but you don't get paid for it. Like you're not in it for the money because the money is bad. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to switch to this consulting thing. I need to make some bank at this stage of my career. And so there's got to be decent money at this thing. So right at the beginning, I put a level on it and said, look, if I can't make at least this much, then it's not worth doing. I got to go find something else to do. So that was in there too. So it was those 3 pieces, like something I love doing with people that don't drive me crazy, but I got to meet this revenue target too. And so it was the intersection of those things is what I designed this business around.
God, I love that. And I know you only have 5 minutes left, but Gian, I want to give you a chance. And then I think Lyle, maybe you had a question. So Gian, feel free to take the floor.
Thank you, April. It was a pleasure hearing you chatting. Actually, I found you on Twitter a few months back, so I was really eager.
Oh, yeah?
I was looking forward to this chat between you and Stu. So my question, I like the story you told before about your, let's say, first experience as head of marketing in that startup that had a problem about basically the focus was too broad, and you narrowed it down and you found a way to start small and then grow vertically instead of trying to chase everything. And that really resonated with me because I found myself in a very similar situation with my own startup a few months back. Do you happen to find when you try to force teams to go through this kind of narrowing path, do you happen to find some pushback? Because, and the follow-up question is, how do you counterbalance that kind of FOMO? Because at the end of the day is fear of missing out. So I sometimes find myself quite in some difficulties trying to have my team really narrow the focus because there's FOMO all over. And I kind of struggle counterbalancing that. So do you have any suggestions?
Yeah, yeah. So like it just because it feels like the opposite of what you should be doing. You're like, cast a wider net,
Exactly.
I'll pull up more fish. And and it's just not the way it works. It's when you're narrowly focused, you get all these kind of compounding effects, right? Every deal you do is referenceable to every other deal you're going to do, as opposed to I do one deal here, but this over here, they don't care about that reference account. And it's every deal you do gets you really smart about what's going on in this really little box. And you do 5 or 6 deals in this really tight space. You're an expert, everything about it after 5 deals. If I do one deal in banking, one deal in telecom, one deal in insurance, one deal in whatever, I don't know anything about anything. I'm an idiot. So there's all this cool stuff that happens when you get really narrow. I think the biggest misunderstanding of it that I tried to work really hard with my teams on whenever we were trying to do this narrowing is, look, this isn't forever. We're not saying we're only going to be this forever and we're only going to sell these sandwiches in a 4-block radius of here. Like that's not, because it isn't inspirational to people. They want to see a vision where you become a great, big, successful, amazing company. And so you come in and say, hey, we're just going to do this little wee thing. Sometimes people are like, what am I doing here? I don't want to be there. I want to go work at Apple. And so what you have to do is sketch out the roadmap that says, we're going to do this and we're going to kill it. And then once we're killing it here, that's going to let us kill it here. And then it gets a little bit bigger. And then once we have that, then we're going to kill it over here. And then we're going to be all singing, all dancing. It's going to be amazing when we get to this thing here. People have this idea that positioning is something you're going to set it and you can't change it ever, which nothing could be further from the truth. Like most of the products that I worked at, we're adjusting the positioning every year. And sometimes we're doing it every 6 months. Sometimes you get lucky and you position and nothing happens and it just works and off you go. But most of the time you're adjusting it as you go along. And so I think people get worried that like we're thinking too small, and in venture-backed businesses we'll say, oh, that's a lifestyle business. It's not a venture-backable business, which is the most bullshit thing. But it's only that if nobody understands the path to getting to be a big business. So you got to give them that. The other thing is people need to understand why the benefits of getting narrowly focused, right? So the benefits of getting narrowly focused are you can get really crisp on your messaging. You can get really crisp on your targeting. You can get really crisp on the campaigns you're running and the sales stuff you're doing, which makes them all more successful. So I was temporary vice president of marketing. This was a terrible gig for a company. And when I started there, I said, who's your target market? And they said, it's Fortune 1000 companies. And I'm like, I can't run marketing programs at Fortune 1000 companies. They have nothing in common. Like where do Fortune 1000 companies hang out? Nowhere. Like they're all different. I can't. And so I'm like, you're going to have to get me more specific than that, because otherwise I can't build a marketing plan. And it turned out we didn't actually really know what the sweet spot of our customers were. And so we ended up doing a bunch of customer interviews. So we did a customer sat survey. Then we did a bunch of interviews. And in the interviews, I'm asking them like, what were you using before? And why did you switch to us? And it became clear that the customers that loved us the most were using our product to manage projects that had remote teams, like teams in different locations. And then when you ask them the question, why do you have teams in different locations? They'd say, because we're outsourcing some stuff to India and China, or we are done a lot of acquisitions. So now you come to me and you say, April, build a marketing plan for companies of a certain size that do a lot of outsourced development to India and China. This is super easy, like way easier than saying, build me a marketing plan for Fortune 1000 companies. And so we were doing all this jazzy stuff. Like we found, this was a few years back, but we found a magazine, and the magazine is called Outsourcers Weekly. And you could take a full page ad for $5,000. And we drove like $1 million worth of pipeline running that cheesy little ad because it was so targeted right at the people we were trying to get at. And so the opportunity with Go and Narrow is you get to do some stuff that's really laser focused, and then your results are really outsized because you're no longer just spraying and praying all over the place. Oh, I hope we get some leads out of this. Instead, you're just like getting right in. We're going to go there. We're going to go there. We're going to go there. And like, poof, big leads. And the team for my marketing teams, at the beginning, when we say we're narrowing down, everybody be like, oh, it's so small. Is that interesting? Whatever. But then once we got doing some stuff, everyone's, oh, now I get why we're doing this, because we can do cheesy little things and drive big pipeline with it. And everything we touch turned to gold, as opposed to before we're doing all this general stuff and nothing was ever really working too well. So I don't know if that answers your question. I think letting people understand the path, but then once people start feeling the magic of that focus, then it's usually pretty easy. Like people get it after that.
Incredible. I'm like, yeah, every company, every startup I talk to needs to be way more specific. I love this challenge for all of us. I know we're over time. Lyle, if you did have a question, maybe we do a quick rapid fire, a buzzer beater one here. Lyle, feel free. I'm a terrible timekeeper.
This has been great. I'm curious about your experience with traditional publishing of a book, because some of us are writing different styles of books potentially. And I'm curious if do you think like traditional publishing is essentially like dead in the water, or their days are numbered, or do you think there are instances where it makes sense to use that?
Here's what I learned, and then I think you got to apply it to your own situation. So what I learned is, if you're a first-time author, you're not Obama, right? Like you're not like a basketball player, like you're not famous, and you go to a publisher, they're not really going to give you an advance, and they're not really going to market your book. Like they're just straight up not going to market your book. And so all you're doing is essentially selling future money for the money up front that they put into producing the book for you, which is cover art, editing, layout, getting it listed on all the places you need to get it listed so that bookstores can carry it. And so that was a really big realization for me, because I had this impression that they're book people and they know how to market books and they're going to do some magic book marketing that I don't know anything about. And that's what they're going to do. And they don't do that. And so you're on the hook for marketing no matter what. So no matter what, if you're writing a book, it's your job to figure out how to get it in the hands of the people you're trying to get it into. Now, traditional publishers, if you can't convince them that you're going to sell like a lot of books, and by a lot of books, I mean 100,000 books, you're nothing to them. You're just, so they'll try to decide, can you sell 10,000 books? And if you can sell 10,000 books, then that'll cover our costs of producing the book. So we'll be even. So we'll do that. And we'll take a bit of a bet on you. Maybe something happens and you end up selling way more than that. We'll make some money on that. But it's not enough for them to put any effort into making your book sell a lot. They don't. And so once I got my head around that, then I was a bit like, I don't really get what traditional publishing does for me at this point. Like at one point, when people first started self-publishing books, there was a little bit of cachet in saying I'm published with a publisher and I didn't just write this and publish it myself. Now, I don't think anybody notices that my book is self-published. I don't think anybody knows. And I don't think they care, frankly. What they care is a good quality product. I don't want it to look like I did it myself, which is why I hired some people to do it. So instead of, and again, that's a privilege that I had because I got money. I could afford to do it, to make the investment up front. And then I had confidence in my ability to sell enough books to offset that cost, and certainly to sell some consulting on the back of the book that would offset that cost. So I thought, I'll just write the check up front. And what I got for that was a lot more control over it, because I already was pretty opinionated on, I want it to be really short. And the book people were like, it needs to be bigger and that's too short for book. And I'm like, not for my people, it's not. And so I got a bit, I'm control freak anyway. So I was a bit like, I don't actually want to give up all that control without getting any value back. And I couldn't figure out where the value back was. I still can't. And so I'm thinking about writing another book, and I've had people come up to me and say, hey, like you've had a successful book already now, and you've sold a lot of copies of that. So you could certainly get a publisher to give you an advance this time around. And I'm like, okay, an advance is just an advance on royalties. I get it now or I get it later. I don't really care. But what else are they going to do for me? And I get really vague answers on that. Like, they don't market you. They don't, like, everybody I know that's had a really big book, they complain that their publishers didn't do anything. And not only did they not do anything, they had to fight with them. They had to fight to get a better cover. They had a fight to not change the title. They had a fight to do whatever. And I was like, why don't I just do that myself? And I can pay somebody. Like, there's these companies, like there's one called Scribe. It used to be called Book in a Box,
Yes.
Scribe Media. And they'll even write the book for you if you want them to. The whole thing. So I didn't go quite that far, but I went with one that didn't write the book for you, but they do everything else. And then you're going to have to manage them. So there is work to that. Whereas the publisher, I think maybe you'd manage them less. I don't know, but I think you'd fight with them more. So I don't know. So for me, I just felt like there's so many options to do this stuff yourself now that I couldn't figure out what traditional publishing was going to get me over doing it myself. And doing it myself gave me a lot of creative control to make the product that I wanted. And I know my audience so well that I felt pretty confident that I could build a product that they really liked, and it's worked for me. So I don't know. Now, if you go with a traditional publisher, you don't have to worry about that. You don't have to go and find somebody. You don't have to cough the money up front, so it's lower risk. If you're not a control freak like me about cover art and whatever, then maybe it's just easier to go with a publisher and you just go do that. But I think it is, I don't know. I do feel like traditional publishing is kind of messed up, and I don't see it surviving.
Awesome. Thanks.
But yeah.
That was good.
So, and then marketing a book is a whole different thing. But you're going to have to do that regardless, whether they pick you up or not. You're still going to have to market the book yourself. Like, they're not going to help you with that, which sucks. But
thankfully for you, that is an area of depth.
Well, again, I had a marketing plan, but I was crossing my fingers. I never marketed a book before. I build the marketing plan as good as I can, but we can tell you in marketing, we don't always know if this stuff's going to work. I don't know what would happen if, I made a bet that speaking and podcasts would be two really good sources of book marketing for me, and they were. But imagine if my plan was all speaking and then COVID hit. That would have put a wrench in the plan, wouldn't it?
Yes, no kidding.
Because we're still doing conferences now. We're doing them virtually, but they're different. There's not as many of them. The audiences aren't as big. That would have changed my marketing plan significantly. So I was lucky that I did it the year before, where there was peak conference, to tell you the truth. Looking back on it, I don't know I don't know if we'll ever get back to conferences like that. So when I if let's say I was to do another book next year, would I be able to lean into conferences as much as I did before? Probably not. And so I ignored other things. I ignored PR because I didn't really know how to do PR, and I didn't have good connections there. And conferences were working good enough for me. So I just didn't go there. But if I was to do another one, I might want to experiment on that side. I don't know.
100%. Given that I've been a terrible timekeeper here, but this was so worth going over on. April, where should folks find you? What's the best place to follow along with your work?
My website's aprildunford.com. And every once in a while, I think I should get back to the blogging, but I'm a pretty terrible blogger. I do have an idea that I'm kicking around for another book. And so part of developing that idea is I'm going to have to start writing about it just to get the word. So maybe I'll start blogging there again. So that's my website, but I'm probably more active on Twitter than anywhere else. And I'm at April Dunford on Twitter.
Amazing. April, I cannot thank you enough for all of the hard-won wisdom, all the advice. And what we'll do is we'll send the recording out to everybody afterwards. We're going to share it with the broader community and list. And April, I just can't thank you enough for making the time. And thank you, everybody, for joining.
Yeah, thanks, everybody, for joining. This was fun.
Amazing. Have a wonderful rest of your day, everybody. See ya.
Okay. See you guys later.
Bye.